The judge in the Zimmerman trial, Judge Deborah Nelson, has just announced that the final arguments, the final statements by both the prosecution and the defense will begin tomorrow at 1 p.m. 1 p.m. Eastern. That's when both sides will make their final arguments before the jury. Earlier, they'll have some preliminary instructions that they will go through with the judge beginning in the morning, but the jury won't be present for that. The judge will deliver the jury the instructions 1 p.m. and then, actually there'll be the arguments, the final closing arguments by both sides, then the instructions, and then they'll go forward. The jury will deliberate on the guilt or innocence or not guilty verdict for George Zimmerman. We'll, of course, have live coverage of that. For today, they've wrapped up coverage in the room. They've wrapped up the session in the courtroom. Judge Deborah Nelson has released all the attorneys and everyone else from this courtroom, at least for this day. The former police chief of Sanford, Florida, Bill Lee, was fired after he let George Zimmerman walk free right after the shooting. Now Lee is speaking out publicly for the first time in an interview with CNN's George Howell. George is in Sanford, Florida. He's joining us now live. How did it go, George?
Wolf, good evening. Yeah, so Bill Lee tells me that he's been watching this trial throughout. You'll remember that he himself had to testify in court. And he says when you look at what his then officers said on the stand, it came out in court, he believes, that they did their job to the letter. And though unpopular at the time, he believes that he upheld his oath. But he lost his job. There were protests and heated rallies.
He might as well be lit.
Anger echoed throughout the nation because the man who shot and killed 17-year-old Trayvon Martin, George Zimmerman, wasn't immediately behind bars. The criticism built. The pressure increased to make an arrest. And it all came down to this man, former Sanford Police Chief Bill Lee. When you look back at what happened, was there a lot of pressure on you to make an arrest?
There was pressure applied. The city manager asked several times during the process, well, can an arrest be made now? And I think that was just from not understanding the process, the criminal justice process. I had one of the city commissioners come to me on 2 different occasions and say, all we want is an arrest. And I explained to them, well, you just can't do that. You have to have probable cause to arrest somebody. And, it was related to me that they just wanted an arrest. They didn't care if it got dismissed later. And you don't do that.
On the night of the shooting, February 26, 2012, police took Zimmerman into custody for questioning, but later let him go. Your lead investigator, Chris Serino, suggested manslaughter on that initial police report. Mm-hmm. Why is it that, for 40-plus days, George Zimmerman walked a free man?
The laws of the state of Florida and the Constitution require you to have probable cause to arrest someone. The evidence and the testimony that we had didn't get us to probable cause.
Police passed the case on to the state attorney's office. The governor then assigned the case to Special Prosecutor Angela Corey, who charged Zimmerman with second-degree murder. But it was too late for Bill Lee, pushed aside after only 10 months on the job, then fired. There was political pressure on one hand, would you agree?
Sure.
There were outside influences on the other?
Yes.
Did you get a fair shake?
I don't think so. I upheld my oath. I upheld, my oath to abide by the laws of the state of Florida and the Constitution, and I'm happy that at the end of the day I can walk away with my integrity. I'm at peace with it on most days. I'm a man of faith, and but it stings.
Lee also talked to me about that 911 audio tape and the non-emergency tapes that were played for Trayvon Martin's family at City Hall without law enforcement present. He says that he advised city officials not to play those tapes, that they should have been played individually for each family member, and certainly with a law enforcement officer present to see it, Wolf.
George Howell with a good exclusive interview. Thanks very much, George, for that report. Coming up, a former neighbor of George Zimmerman gives emotional testimony about her terror when someone broke into her home. How might that have swayed the jury? Stand by. All right, here's the schedule that Judge Deborah Nelson just announced for the remainder of this Zimmerman trial. The court is in recess now until 9 a.m. tomorrow morning. That's when attorneys will meet with the judge to go over final instructions, making sure everyone is on board as to what the instructions should be to the jury from the judge. The state will then, at 1 p.m. tomorrow afternoon, the state will deliver its closing arguments. The prosecutors will deliver their closing arguments. The defense will deliver its closing argument Friday morning. Then there will be the state's rebuttal. In effect, the state will get the last word. Later on Friday, the jury will get the case for deliberation Friday afternoon. We don't know how long that jury will deliberate. Certainly, one of the most gripping witnesses of the day today was a former neighbor of George Zimmerman. She testified how she was home with her infant son when two young men broke in, an incident that happened before Trayvon Martin was killed. Here's some of her testimony.
I was home on a Wednesday with my son. He was, I think, 9 months at the time. And I heard someone ring my doorbell repeatedly. So I went to check upstairs because I didn't have a peephole. And I saw two young African-American guys ring my doorbell repeatedly, and they kept on looking up at the window. And I called my mom because I didn't know what to do. And they left. Then after a while, I went back upstairs to check one more time. And they were walking in front of my house. One came towards my house. And I was on the phone with my mom at the time, and I started crying. And I called the police. They broke into my house. I heard some bangs downstairs. The dispatcher told me to grab any weapon I had because I had my son in my arms. He had woken up. And just prepared to use it if I had to. The guy was I was locked in my son's bedroom, and he was shaking the doorknob trying to get in. And I was sitting there with a pair of rusty scissors and my son in one arm. And the police came, and they ended up leaving.
Let's discuss what we just heard. Joining us, our CNN legal correspondent, Jean Casares, along with Sonny Hostin and Mark Najam. Jean was later comforted time with her as a result of this break-in into her house. How important was her testimony?
I think it was important. The jury had already heard from the lead investigator about this home invasion. Now they got to see the victim, and they also learned how close in time it was to February 26th. Now, take the state of mind of George Zimmerman. That was freshly on his mind. And, of course, they got some character evidence in the back door because George was right there to help her.
What about that, Mark? How important was her testimony?
Yeah, Gene hit it on the head. Basically, it showed that he was a good guy, a good neighbor, and that he was he had a reasonable thought that there would be somebody in the neighborhood, that there had been break-ins and such. And look, he's fighting for his life. I misstated something earlier. With the ag assault, it's a mandatory minimum 3 years, even with the lesser that the state is seeking. So even if he gets the very smallest, he's got mandatory prison time. So the defense is pulling out everything to go ahead and show that his actions were reasonable. They don't want to leave any stone unturned and settle for a manslaughter or an ag assault. That's going to be prison time, even if lessers come in.
All right, Sonny?
I thought it was actually helpful for the prosecution because it shows what he had in his mind. He had in his mind that Trayvon Martin was a criminal, was perhaps one of the other African-American teens that had broken into the neighbor. I got to tell you, I don't understand why the defense called that witness. I don't think it was helpful at all.
All right, guys, hold on for a moment. We'll continue our analysis of what happened coming up, what happened in and outside when the Boston Marathon bombing suspect went to court today. We'll have full details of that. First time we've seen Tsarnaev, obviously, in weeks and weeks, plus a shocking hit and run, all caught by a security camera.